I understand Jesus. But the third principle, I think, is the most important. And there are several places where this principle is made. I'm going to show you two. Look at James chapter 2 for a moment. And then when you find James chapter 2, turn back to James chapter 1 where it actually is. Sorry about that. God sometimes moves him around just to keep me humble. Okay. So James chapter 1, verse 22. Do not merely listen to the world. Let me try that again. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like a man who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But the man who looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues to do this, not forgetting what he has heard but doing it, he will be blessed in what he does. Third principle is really simple. Scripture is not a book to be understood. It's a call to action. The priority in Scripture is not about understanding Scripture. The priority is on doing Scripture. And it is possible for us to get into all sorts of prolonged discussion about what a passage means. And I find those discussions interesting. It's what I do for a living. But at some point, we have to ask ourselves, after we figured out what it means, are we going to do anything about it? And one of the ways we determine whether those discussions are worth having or not is, okay, at the end of the day, what are we going to do? What is this passage calling us to do? Jesus himself makes this point at the end of Matthew chapter 7. He's just preached a pretty powerful sermon, Sermon on the Mount. And lo and behold, at the end of the sermon, he breaks out into a kid song, which goes like this, 7:24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rains came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. It's interesting at the end of the sermon, the way it concludes, I ask my students sometime, okay, I read them that passage, and I say, okay, now, who's the wise man? And they immediately respond, the man who built his house on the rock. No, this is not about construction. Who is the wise man? The wise one is the one who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, the emphasis is not on, did you understand what I said? The emphasis is on, okay, now go out and do this. The most basic principle of biblical interpretation is go out and do what you understand. And when you do that, guess what? You turn out understanding more Bible. If you wait till you get it all understood before you decide to do any of it, you're never going to do any of it. There's this great, somewhat true story. It doesn't appear to be totally true. It just appears to be partly true, which makes it a really good preacher story. Here's the factual part. Well, actually, I won't tell you which parts are factual and which parts appear to be made up. I'll just tell the story and you can enjoy it. There was this guy in California, Ken, not far from your church, and he was bored. He was an older guy, and he was just bored. And so he got this great plan. This is all true part. He got himself a lawn chair and attached a hot air balloon to it. And his notion was, and he had it all weighted down, and His notion was he was going to cut the ropes, he was going to float up a few hundred feet, look around, have a nice ride, and then use a BB gun that he had with him to shoot holes in his balloon so he would slowly descend back to Earth. Now, unfortunately, he was not an engineer, and this plan is rife with potential problems. And the big problem was he did not understand the relationship of the size balloon he had and him and his weight in the lawn chair. So when he cut the ropes, he didn't float up a few hundred feet. He went up thousands of feet. And as he starts shooting his balloon, he's coming down very slowly. He's floating around up there all day and drifts into the landing pattern of Los Angeles International Airport. You can only imagine, he'd taken some peanut butter sandwiches up with him. You can only imagine coming in, landing on an airplane, looking out your window and seeing a guy eating a peanut butter sandwich with a gun across his lap in a lawn chair hooked to a balloon. So it takes all day for him to get this thing down, and when he gets down, every reporter in Southern California is waiting for him. And they all have the same question. By the way, this was before 9/11. Now he had just gotten shot down. I mean, there would be no interviews. There would just be nothing left. But so he floats down, and now they all have just one question for him. And the question is, how could you do anything so stupid? And his answer is classic. Say, why would you do that? His answer was, well, you can't just sit around. You got to do something. And I thought, I think I want him as a member of my church. That's my idea of a guy who's got it right. I preached at a church for 10 years that was as serious about its Bible study as any group of people I've ever been around. In Bible class, we would be having serious and deep discussion about Greek verb tenses. But every once in a while, I would gently have to remind them outside of class, okay, are we going to do anything about this? Now that we've teased and tortured the passage to get the meaning to kind of come out of it, are we going to go out and do what it calls us to do? We read Scripture to learn about God, love of God and love of neighbor. We read Scripture through the eyes of Jesus Christ, and we hear Scripture as a call to action. And when you start reading Scripture that way, I think it gets really exciting again. Because what I've discovered when I ask the question, okay, if I take this text seriously, what am I going to have to do? All of a sudden, Scripture becomes a great challenge to my life. Let me illustrate.